Yeah, to make sure I got it right at 7 o'clock, at least according to my clock. Right on time tonight. Hopefully, you guys are having a good time and everybody is safe. I've got tonight, we're going to take a look at the video that I just posted up. That is choosing the right camshaft for your daily driver, and why, for me personally, I would pick different camshafts for different applications. And that's the way that I would break it down, having done so many dyno tests. But I also recognize the fact that maybe even more so, but certainly every bit as much, that your individual personality and your desire for whatever you're trying to achieve with your daily driver, I guess, your personality is also going to dictate the kind of camshaft that you'd want. So if you were the kind of guy that doesn't care about having a rough idle or the need for a converter, and all you want is, hey, if there's a stage 3, the only thing better than a stage 3 is a stage 4. If you're that kind of guy, which I salute you, that's awesome. Then you should pick that, and you should do that and go through that and experience all that and enjoy all of that. For me, and the ones that I recommend, not just for my application, if I were to put something in mine and didn't have a transmission that I think at any moment is, I'm fully expecting it just to drop out of the truck. But if I was going to put a camshaft in my vehicle, this is what I would do. If I had a transmission that I thought would hold up to these, this is kind of what I would do. Because for me, the truck, when I look at the truck, I look at it as a utilitarian thing. It's not something that I go drag race with. It's not something that I go out and drive to the lake in and go around corners fast or any of those things. For me, it's a thing that we use to, you use it to tow stuff, you use it to haul stuff. I put engines in, I do all that stuff I do all the stuff that basically a truck is designed to do. It would be nice to have more power in the truck. Like I always wanted some form of boost, but again, the transmission thing. And if I were to put a camshaft in it, because my particular one, my Silverado, is a 5.3, the camshaft that I would choose for the 5.3, I went over specifically in the video the things that I would pick. I have a 5.3. If I had a 6.0, I would do this cam. If I had a 4.8, I would do this cam. And they're all basically, you can think about them as different stages, but they're different camshafts. And actually, in the case of the 5.3 and the 6.0, I might ultimately pick the same camshaft. For the 4.8, if I had a 4.8 in a truck, what I would do, having done many, many tests on 4.8s, is that they respond, like in terms of peak numbers, to a big camshaft. I've run lots of 4.8s with like heads, cam, and intake that push it up near 500 horsepower. I haven't ever made 400 or 500 horsepower with a 4.8 with a heads, cam, and intake combination. I think that that's possible. I think that with the right amount of milling the head and the big enough camshaft and finding out how much I could get away with, maybe I could even notch the piston a little bit and put enough camshaft in, enough intake manifold. I'm pretty sure that I could get to 500 the way that we run it. But that's the far end of the spectrum. Knowing what I know about a 4.8 is that they don't need a whole bunch of camshaft. In fact, for a daily driver, almost all the camshafts that I run in a 5.3 or a 6.0 tend to hurt power on the 4.8. They don't hurt it everywhere. They just hurt it in a big percentage of the low part of the RPM range for a 4.8. It's a small motor. It doesn't need that much camshaft. So relatively speaking, the stock cam and the stock heads and the stock intake run on the 4.8 that it shares with the 5.3 and the early 6.0. The 6.0 has 317 heads, but has the same intake and had the same camshaft, the early ones. But it shares it with the 5.3. But with a 4.8, all of that stuff is relatively bigger because that motor, the smaller motor, requires more airflow and makes less power. And therefore, the head flow is relatively bigger. The cam timing is relatively wilder. The intake manifold flows relatively more on the 4.8 than it does on the 5.3. So if you look at the video that I have up where I compare the 4.8 and the 5.3 and the 6.0 in stock trim, you'll see that the 4.8 makes peak power a little bit higher than the 5.3. And then the 6.0 makes power a little bit lower than the 5.3 at a lower engine speed, and the 4.8 makes it higher. And that's, given the displacement, that's not surprising. especially the fact that they have similar head flow. I know the 317 flows a little bit more, but it has the chamber on it is much worse. And they all share the same intake manifold, which would dictate that they all kind of want to work in the same operating range. The bigger the motor is with the same components, the lower the RPM where it's going to make peak power. It just, the displacement tames everything, which is why when I choose camshafts, for the 4.8, I picked the smallest cam. So for the 4.8, when I was doing the video, my choice for the 4.8, if I was going to upgrade to something, I wouldn't put any of the other factory cams in. I definitely would not put an LS9 camshaft in a 4.8. It's just going to be so soft down low. It's going to be awful. So that wouldn't be a good choice. But the torque cam from Brian Tooley Racing seems to be a good choice for that. It's very mild compared to the, even compared to the factory stuff. It's a 202. It's a single pattern, which I don't normally recommend. But in this case, it works out fairly well on the 4.8. It has a tight enough LSA, and it's not really high lift. It's a mild cam, and yet we get pretty good gains from it. In the test that I showed when we ran it on the 5.3, the torque cam was almost the equal of the stage 1 truck cam, but it has more low-speed power. Now, obviously, when we ran the Truck Norris cam and compared that on the 5.3 to the stage 1 and the stage 2 truck cams, the Truck Norris is better everywhere. It makes as much or more power than the stage 2 cam. It makes a lot more low speed power than the stage 2 or the stage 1. In fact, it's as good as the torque cam down low on the 5.3. The thing is that I wouldn't pick the Truck Norris cam for the 4.8 because I would be worried about having to step up to a different stall speed on the converter, especially on the 4.8. I still think, even though it makes good wide open throttle, low speed power, on a 4.8, I still think it's a little on the big side for that. So the torque cam would be my choice for the 4.8 for a daily driver. If you're wanting to make lots of power, then I go to the complete other end of the spectrum. And we're talking about NA motors. Because if I'm going to do a daily driver, I'm going to put a daily driver kind of cam in it. A cam that's not going to give away a bunch of what I already like about the stock cam, but is going to add more of everything that I do want when I put a camshaft in. If I'm going to do a performance application where I'm going to build a 4.8 and try to make power, I'm going to put a cam in it. I'm going to put the kind of cam that fits in there. I might go a little bit smaller on a 4.8. I might do a 227 and not go all the way to the 231 stuff that seems to be near the maximum of available piston to valve clearance. But if you take a look at the videos I have up, when we put a ported head on, a ported 706 head or a 205 head, a TrickFlow 205 head, you could use the Airflow or Mammo 205 head, and a fast intake manifold on a 4.8 with a 231 kind of camshaft in it. In the one that we did, we only used a 224 cam, which tells you a little bit about the 4.8. But we made 470 or 480 horsepower with that combination. So if I was going to try to make power, then that's the way that I would do it. I would put a sizable cam in it. For me, there's no reason to go in between those two things. And this is just me. I like guys that do. I like guys that pick a 210 or 220 or whatever. But if I'm gonna try to make power with a 4.8 on a stock bottom end 4.8, I'm gonna go all in. If I'm gonna do a turbo on a 4.8, I'm gonna pick a small cam. We've already been through that on the video that I did comparing the Truck Norris cam to the sloppy stage 2 cam. So we have a decent sized cam and a bigger cam. And on a 4.8, I think the sloppy stage 2 is just a terrible idea. Unless you're trying to just drag race it and you've got a really high stall speed converter, and then guys put the high rams on the 4.8s and run. And if you're running at 8,000 RPM, God bless you, and away you go, and it's going to make lots of power. But that's not the combination that I would put together, because I think that that's going to be more problematic. So the 4.8 doesn't need anywhere near that much cam. And if you're wanting to make, let's say you want to make 1,000 horsepower, and I always use that number because that's the new 500. It's the go-to kind of thing. 1,000 horsepower is a lot, and it's enough to go really fast. And if you put that in a Mustang chassis or an IROC or, almost anything. So if you're doing that with a 4.8, you're going to have for a turbo application, you don't need a lot of camshaft. That's the benefit. I wouldn't pick the big camshaft in a 4.8 with a turbo. I'd pick the small camshaft. In fact, I've run the torque cam before under boost, and it works fine. Same thing with the the truck Norris cam. And I know that Matt over at Sloppy has run the Sloppy Stage 2. But if you're going to do that, it's a high RPM cam and a 4.8. And especially if you put a tunnel ram, put a Holley high ram on it, it's definitely going to be a high RPM deal. I mean, even the thing with the 224 cam with heads on it and a fast intake manifold was wanting to make peak power at 7,000 or more. So with a high ram, that's going to be even higher. So that's not where I want to be on an otherwise kind of junkyard motor. I would rather gear it right, make lots of average power production, make the number that I need to make with a 4.8. I'd pick a small cam. So I'd pick a small cam with a 4.8 for a daily driver. I pick a small cam with a turbo for anything that's like 1,000 horsepower or less. And then I would pick a big cam on the 4.8 if I was doing an NA thing and doing an all motor build. Because if you're going to do that, you're going to put gear in it, you're going to put converter in it, and all of those things are going to happen. So on the 5.3, I think I would go, I stepped up from the 4.8 camshaft. I went away from the torque cam, and I would go to the one that I recommend is a stage 1 truck cam from Brian Tooley, or the equivalent of that from Texas Speed, or, Cam Motion or Comp Cams, because everybody has a cam that's going to be similar to that, I'm sure. So and I showed in the video that when you compare what happens between a stage 1 and a stage 2 cam on the 5.3, the stage 2 just doesn't add enough at the top to offset what I would think would be happening down low, and also with drivability, and also the potential need for converter. With a 5.3, the truck Norris cam might be a better choice. It makes more power than both of those. It makes more low speed than the stage 1, it makes more top end than the stage 2. So really it kind of has everything. On a 5.3, I don't think you would need to go to anything more than the stock converter on a 5.3 on a truck Norris cam. I think a converter would help if you put a 26 or 2800 RPM stall converter in. I think that probably would help, but you don't have to put it in there. And that's what I like as a daily driver. A daily driver to me is something that still uses the stock converter. Lots of guys might argue with that, but that's my definition. So on the 5.3, I would do it in a similar way that I do the 4.8. I would pick maybe a truck Norris cam for an NA one. I would also pick the truck Norris cam if I was running a turbo on the 5.3, or something like that, something mild like that. Because again, it's easy to get to 4-digit power levels with that kind of camshaft. That kind of camshaft is going to make over 400 horsepower NA, and then you see the multiplier at 14.5 pounds. Now we're at 800. And then another, 7 pounds. So at 20 pounds, we're like at 1,000 horsepower on a 5.3 with a truck Norris cam. So those are pretty big numbers. And so you can get there with that kind of camshaft, and you don't need a stage 2 or stage 3 or 5 or 10 or 12 turbo cam or NA cam or any other kind of cam to get to those power numbers with a 5.3. You need a fairly small one. And as I showed in the video previously, that having the small one benefits you by having more boost response, which is good for driving around. Again, if you are driving this around, if you're doing it as a drag race thing, then you can put other kinds of cams in there with the kind of converter that you have in it that's going to give you the launch speed that you want, and then go drag racing. That's kind of a different thing. Like the 4.8 with a 5.3, if I was trying to make power, I'd put a 231 kind of camshaft in it. I'd put a 231, 232. Somewhere in the 230s probably, and then the mid to high 240s on the exhaust. And I would put a ported head, a fast manifold on it, and then you could certainly make 500 with that kind of 500 flywheel with that kind of combination. So as an NA deal, I would just go to the far end of the spectrum of what we could fit. The interesting thing, and I had a discussion with Brian Tooley the other day, and he was showing me some results from a camshaft that they just designed that's new. So you guys are hearing it here first. That's actually smaller than that makes comparable power to all of those 231 cams that I tested. So I'm excited to try one of those and see what's going on. Because that might, if it has the kind of power that we normally expect from a 231 kind of camshaft in these applications that fits stock piston to valve clearance, and it has better low speed power, obviously I would be all in on something like that. So that will be an interesting thing. And then on the 6.0, definitely truck Norris cam. I mean, if I'm going to do a daily driver and a 6-liter or a 6.2, I would put the truck Norris cam in. Or the other option is I would step up to the stage 2 truck cam, because as I showed in the video, the stage 2 truck cam compared to the stage 1 on the 6-liter added enough power where it justified itself, you know, in comparison to any kind of losses that you might have down low. So the stage 2 truck cam for a 6.0, stage 1 for the 5.3, torque cam for the 4.8. On the 5.3 and the 6.0, I probably would be very tempted to go with the truck Norris stuff, because it just, when you look at the power, it's hard for me because I look at them in terms of the power curves, and I know that when they're driving around that I might see something different. But based on what I'm seeing from the power curves, even running it fairly low in the RPM range and starting there, if I'm seeing more power at wide open throttle, even down low, I think that the cam's going to react fairly well. Maybe more testing at part throttle, like 50% throttle or something, might be another way to validate what's going on with these camshafts. So that's something else. So as a matter of fact, that's going to be our poll for tonight. Should I run dyno testing at 50% throttle to show part throttle performance? So what I'm asking is, normally when we run dyno tests and we're running a camshaft comparison or cylinder head or whatever, turbo, whatever we're doing, we go to wide open throttle, the dyno loads it at whatever our pre-programmed like RPM start point is, and then revs it at whatever our pre-programmed RPM rate is. 300 per second is normally what we choose, to whatever the maximum speed that we plug in. I can also do that, and it's a lot easier to do that on fuel-injected motors than it is on carbureted motors, because we can base it on TPS, or I could just put a throttle stop on it and just go to the same position every time, not do testing. I mean, I'm going to do testing at wide open throttle the way that I always do it, but I could also do that at 50% throttle, and that might give us a better idea on what's happening. Because when we're driving our trucks and stuff in vehicles, we're not matting it all the time, when we're driving in town, even when we're getting on the freeway or whatever. So it might be interesting to see what's happening at like 50% throttle. So let me know. We're going to ask, should I run the dyno testing at 50% throttle to show part throttle performance? And we'll ask our community. 142 people here, and I'm showing 52 likes. So get those likes up. Everybody hit the like button. Stop what you're doing and hit the freaking like button. Travis, I'd like to see multiples of throttle, 25, 50, 75, and 100, and then lay them over each other and see if they lay over equally or if they go up and down, curl down. They're not going to lay over equally. If you run the same combination at 25, 50, 75%, and 100%, you're going to see that they don't lay over, because they're going to be different power outputs, definitely. We want to see more tests down low. It's not all about peak power. That's not what the part throttle question is. So let's see what other people have going on here. Scott, I have a high ram on a stroker. It's not ideal on the street. Combined with a big turbo, it's a slug until 4,500. Then you got to hold on, I would imagine. Does Brian Tooley have a bigger cam than a stage 4? Yes, they have custom stuff. Hunter, a lot of us big displacement 3rd gen Hemi guys are still running the variable 6.4 liter intake manifold versus the high rams. Honestly, that's probably a better choice. The variable intake that we ran on the 5.7 at West Tech does very, very well. And I've tested a number of those over the years. I tested the FR500 intake manifold, then also GSRs and those kinds of things. And it's really good if you can have multiple runner lengths, because as we know, long runner makes more power down low and short runner makes more power at the top. If you can have a good switch over point there, then you can have kind of the best of both worlds, or at least the best of what both of those runner lengths will do. Skyram on a 4.8. Yeah. I know, Tim. We had free pizza last night. Truck Norris for a performance cam in a sports car. I don't know. You got to give me more information than that. What cam would you recommend for a 6-liter with a caddy blower in a boat? For the boat application, I would wonder about whether it's a jet or a V drive or an out drive, and also what is the exhaust. A lot of times the camshaft is going to be dictated by what your exhaust is, so that you don't get reversion going back into the cylinder head. So sometimes you can only put mild cams in those. Richard, I have a 79 280Z. I'm sure it's Z and not X that I want to build a Radical 4.8 for. Solid roller cam. I run methanol or 85. Plan to run single plane and a good carb. What kind of RPM can I spin the stock stuff to? I don't know. We've got a 7500 with 4.8s, and I've seen guys go more than that, to 8,000 or more with a stock bottom end. You just have to concern yourself with the valve train. Wouldn't 50% throttle just give you 50% of the power? Not always, because a 50% TPS reading might not be 50% of the airflow potential of the throttle body. I'm wondering if the Truck Norris cam and an LM753 will make 400 foot-pounds of torque. I can take a look and tell you what it did when we ran it on the engine dyno anyway. Let's see. Cathedral port heads, 5.3 liter. Yes, it did. Brian Tooley had a Gen 4 5.3 liter, and it made right at 400 foot-pounds with the Truck Norris cam. And I think that mine did a similar thing too. I can look at the L33 and see what it did, but I think that it was very close to that. Cathedral port 5.3. I remember my engine families. And a Truck Norris cam. Let's see where we're at. Yeah, this one was 413 or 414 flywheel. So it can certainly do that. Why is there such a difference in low-end torque production from a stock 5.7 Vortec and say a 5.3 LS truck motor? Well, if you're talking about one of them making more than the other, usually the bigger motor, Gary, will make more. So the 5.7 will usually make more torque, and then there's a lot of other things after that. The displacement would be the first thing, and then things like compression, the intake manifold plays a big part. The cylinder heads, the compression, all of those things will come into play. Big Fur, I'm having a really hard time deciding on a cam for my Turbo 4.8, 76 millimeter turbo, factory 4L60, and a torque converter, and not a daily driver. A truck, if you have gears in that thing, and I don't know how heavy the vehicle is, and I don't know which 76 millimeter you're talking about, or how much, if you told me how much power you're trying to make and what turbo that is, maybe what gear is in it, we can give you a better idea. 6.2 liter heads versus Cathedral PRC heads. Take a look at the video that I have up comparing the only comparison I'll have there is the factory LY6 head, which is like an LS3 head, versus a set of 225 trick flow heads. And the 225 trick flow heads definitely make more power than a stock one. I've never tested a ported 6.2 head versus a ported Cathedral port head. Dan, the part throttle horsepower test could be useful for tuning a boat engine where it is run under high load all the time. Fixing to build my 5.3, going to put 5,000 in it. What would be the best way to spend it? I don't know what condition your 5.3 is in now, but for a typical junkyard 5.3, you would do cam and springs and then a small turbo, and you could make lots of power. Would you do 50% and 100% with a carb? It doesn't usually work as well with a carburetor because we're relying on the signal through the carburetor to get fueling. So we could try that and see, you just run it on the primary circuit and then run it on the secondary circuit also at wide open throttle and see what's going on there. Have you ever looked into running a Whiplash Cam? I have not. I'm not sure what that is. Joe, I know this for GMs. Actually, you can ask any question that you want here. So that's a good thing about it. And on a 5.7 Hemi, I have 5.7 Hemi cam tests up. For a daily driver, I would pick one of the smaller ones. Like I think that Comp has a 260 cam that we had pretty good luck with. And then now they have some newer ones. So whatever their smallest version of their new LST or whatever they're calling the other camshafts now. I have a Summit Stage 2 NA cam with a VS Racing billet 80 on a 6-liter. And the Stage 2 cam and that size turbo on a 4.8 is going to be a lot softer down low. Have you ever done a stock versus knife edge crank? I haven't done that. What does it take valve train besides an appropriate cam to get an LS happy around 8,000 RPM? If you want it to make power there, then you have to have not only the right cam that will do that has the right specs to do that, it also has to have cam stability to be able to operate there effectively for long periods of time, or even short periods of time, multiple times. So the cam has to have the right lift and duration and lobe separation angle, the combination of valve events to have it want to make power on that displacement at that RPM. It also has to have the right kind of ramp rate and lobe shape to be stable and work in conjunction with your valve spring. And the valve spring has to be, it's not just lots of spring rate, it's other things too. So they have to be matched to work and run at that RPM. You have to get the spring, like I said, the frequency of the spring is very critical too for that kind of RPM. Also, where the spring is in relation to how close it is to coil bind, your rocker ratio or the rocker weight. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into making that thing RPM right. And that's doesn't even take into account what's going on with the short block. Short block is usually not that hard. You have to have the right kind of oiling, the right kind of bearing clearances. You know, there's a lot going on there. Hughes Whiplash cams are meant specifically for low compression smog era small block Mopars. Okay, I haven't heard of that. There's a guy on YouTube running the lawnmower carburetor. I've seen that if you put a really, really tiny carburetor on a big motor, actually it's going to draw more fuel. He's not going to get good mileage with that because the fuel mileage is not, as we've seen from the theory about the old wives' tale, the internet conspiracy about the 200 mile an hour or the 200 mile per gallon carburetor. A carburetor is not going to dictate the fuel mileage of the motor. It can help that, like it could give it too much fuel. It could not atomize it properly, but there's no magic thing that the carburetor is going to do to dramatically improve the fuel mileage from something that was getting, let's say, 20 miles per gallon. Let's say if it was a V8 that it was even getting 20 miles per gallon. No carburetor in existence right now that I'm aware, any technology that I'm aware of could even come close to doing that. So that's not possible. So just magically thinking you could put a really tiny carburetor on there and then that would get it fuel mileage, because the fuel mileage isn't dictated by that. The fuel mileage is dictated by the weight of the vehicle, the aerodynamic, the aerodynamics, basically the amount of fuel that it takes to get that thing and all the frictional losses and everything, the rolling resistance, all of those things require a given amount of like power input. And if it's big and heavy and not aerodynamic and has a lot of parasitic loss, and the tires are not pumped, all these things require that it has more power to go a certain speed, and then it's going to use more fuel to continue to go that certain speed. So the carburetor thing is not, it's not real. How much horsepower and torque is a 4L80E transmission good for? I don't know what the stock one is good for. It's not actually rated very high, but built ones can take a lot. Dan, I'm sorry to hear about it, and congratulations, I guess. New cars get better fuel mileage by leaning the car out, but after a certain point, it increases the NOx. All of that is true, but again, it still requires a given amount of power. The way that they reduce a lot of that is obviously with overdrive gearing, better aerodynamics, reducing frictional losses, reducing pumping losses, all kinds of stuff that can help that have nothing to do with the carburetor. Why not spin it to 8,000? Right now, I shift at 7,000. It drops to 6,200 on the shift. I don't know the answer to that. Pizza is always a good topic. I had pizza today, as a matter of fact. We've all read about, or at least I have, about Smokey's hot vapor engine. Honda Insight makes good mile per gallon by cutting injectors every time you lift off the throttle. That's pretty normal for fuel injection, lightweight cars, high gears, lean burn, battery. Yeah, all of that's good. And the lean burn stuff works good. That's what the Civic VX did, the one that I gave to Chad. It would run at 19.5 to 1 or so air fuel. So it takes a lot to make that work. But and also the car is fairly light. It's fairly aerodynamic. It's not spinning a lot of stuff. I'm camming an LS3 Camaro. I've settled on a TSP Stage 2 cam. Is there any reliability issue that I should be aware of, or any tips you could share? I don't know anything about that camshaft, having not run that specific one. I need to go back and look at. We did run an LS3, and I did run a TSP cam, and I think that it was around 227. But I don't know. I don't know their stages well enough to know exactly what that cam is. Would it be good to put a carburetor on an LS or just leave it fuel injected? You can do either one, and the carburetor is not going to be the make or break thing. The big change from power from a carburetor and fuel injection is really the intake manifold. Thin crust margarita pizza. No, I do like all kinds of pizzas, but the one that I was having was more thick crust stuff. You wouldn't run the test at 50% throttle, but 50% map value. Okay. Ironically, I've seen a 305 with a quadrojet and a Caprice get low 20s, and an equivalent weight car with much smaller fuel-injected V6 get significantly worse mileage. Clay Milliken is awesome. Yep, that's true. Matt, I put a Summit Pro LS 205 217 500 lift in a 6-liter, and my daily 5.3. The Pearl 60 is alive with a Sunex boost valve and servo. So the trans had to come apart, right? Both trucks run great with that cam, easy to tune. Run mothballs and the aviation fuel on a big block 305. So Shadow Ops, is that all? There aren't any in between those numbers? What's the max lift you run on the stock bottom end TPI 305? Why do you want to know that? So there's more to your question than that. The maximum lift you could run, the stock bottom end wouldn't limit lift. The thing that's going to limit lift are your valve springs and your retainer to seal clearance. You might be concerned about piston to valve clearance, but that's not a lift issue. That's actually a duration issue. How much power will most stock LS heads support without porting or anything? Well, with a turbo, they'll support 4-digit power levels. 2,000 mile per gallon cars were so 2012. But I thought that was the end of the world. That was the end of the Mayan calendar, though, right? Use a 200 millimeter throttle body, and you'll have half throttle power, the same as full throttle. That's right. If the throttle body at 50% is flowing enough air to support the wide open throttle power level, then you should see all of the power. 50% throttle at low RPM may not pose much of a restriction. That's true. When you test a bigger throttle body, normally the gains from a bigger throttle body are increased with engine speed as airflow demand is increased. It increases with engine speed. Even if the power is not going up, the airflow that the motor is processing continues to go up. So it needs more airflow. So bigger throttle body, if it is indeed, if the smaller throttle body isn't indeed restricting your combination, the bigger throttle body will add more power at a higher engine speed. Conversely, if you run part throttle like was suggesting here, and the throttle body is big enough, it will support the power might be the same at 50% at 2,000 RPM as it is at 100%, because at 50% throttle, if that throttle body is big enough, it may have all of the airflow that motor needs to make whatever kind of power it was making at 2,000 RPM. Let's say it was making 120 horsepower. So let's see. No anchovies, though. No, I draw the line there. Richard just tuned in a few minutes ago. If fuel injection was replaced with a carb, what would, I don't know, what DET up make more? I don't really know what your question is. If you're asking about carburation versus fuel injection, I have lots of videos up that cover that. The carburation, usually the change between carburation and fuel injection requires a different intake manifold. So like if we run a truck manifold and then a dual plane manifold or a single plane manifold, the big change has nothing to do with what is delivering the fuel. The big change has to do with the intake design. If we run, let's say, a single plane manifold on both of them, run a carburetor, or run port injection, let's say our single plane manifold is equipped with port injection, which I have that video up, carburation will usually make more power because of charge cooling. So it introduces the fuel at the entry, basically, of the airflow into the manifold and then into the head and then into the combustion chamber. There's more time for charge cooling to take place normally. So usually the carburetor will add more power on the same manifold against port fuel injection. How far have you pushed the turbo LS with pump 91 to meth? I don't do that. If I'm going to go all in on a turbo application, I run good gas in it. Pineapple and ham. I do have people that like hearty Hawaiians. I had a 327 with 1.5" primary long tubes, and that thing ripped out of the hole. Okay. I built an L3353, which I like for my Fox body with parts laying around. How would an LS2 cam with a Trailblazer SS intake mount perform? Lucky for you, I've tested all of the factory cams, and you can go look at that video because it's up right now. And I ran it on a 5.3, so you'll have a pretty good idea how that LS2 cam does. It's not nearly as good as an aftermarket cam. Could you run a gas engine like a diesel engine with no throttle blade, just fuel and timing? If you had enough control, probably not just with timing. If you had enough control of the valves, you probably could do that like BMW does. Let's see. They only use it for a few years. Oh, he's talking about the 229 gear. I know that a Ford gear, we used to put a 241 we put a 241 in the Mustang for the Silver State, so I could run it in 4th gear. If you're looking for MPG, it's mostly air resistance that affects it. Rolling resistance is insignificant compared to it. That's not accurate, because at 60 or 65 miles an hour, you don't the aero drag is not dramatic yet. So I suppose most LS heads flow well enough to support the power that I would need for an NA engine for a daily driver. Pretty easily. Just tell us how much power you're trying to make, and I can tell you what the heads. Those heads flow. The best cathedral port LS head flows 245 or 250 CFM, and then the best rec port head flows 315. So you have enough to support more than 500 horsepower on a cathedral port one pretty easily, and then enough to support way over 600 on a rec port. So I don't know how much power you're trying to make, but that's what they'll do. What's the LS1 blocks horsepower limit on a nitrous motor? I don't, you couldn't run enough nitrous to get to the limit of the block. You're going to break something else first, I think. I wonder if an air to water intercooler full of ice would make a huge difference on an NA motor. They've done that at Bonneville, and the problem with that is it is a restriction to airflow. But at Bonneville, they did it in such a way that they had pressurized air because they did it with vehicle speed. So that pressurized air going through the intercooler and bringing the charge temperature down and improving the power. On just drawing through it, it's hard to make that setup big enough to where it's not a restriction, and then you still get a change in charge temperature. The nice thing about an intercooler is that it has pressure from the turbo going through it and makes things much nicer. Is the BTR torque cam too small for a 6-liter with a TBSS intake and ported 7099 heads? I don't know why you would combine that with ported heads. The Truck Norris probably would be better. Demon Tech, your El Camino has 241 heads. I thought that was a Ford ratio. My Insight picked up 5 miles per gallon by pumping up the tires. It is a big thing. I mean, I did that a lot on the VX. Obviously, the alignment, form drag under the car. We put belly pans and stuff like all of that's, the aero stuff is important. But at 60 miles an hour, there's not a lot of aero drag. So for aero drag versus rolling resistance, it takes an average of 15 horsepower to maintain 60 miles an hour for an average car. 10 horsepower, that is going into moving the air out of the way. Well, I would like to know what average car is. I would like to know what that average number is, because on the data that I took on the Civic, it was nowhere near that. Would there be any point to upgrading the cam on an LB4 with a stock heads? Yeah, a camshaft will definitely help you on that motor. It was a standard gear for LC3 engine option. I'm building a street strip 1993 Dakota with a completely stock 6.1. 727. What would be a good cam? What gains would I expect? Michael, take a look at the Hemi cam test that I have, the videos that I have up. You can see what kind of gains you get. The Hemi responds like an LS does to cam timing because it has really good cylinder heads already. And the 6.1 definitely has even better heads. So it should respond very well to a cam. And there's lots of good cams out now for the Hemi. $15 horsepower is like 60 miles per gallon. That's not average. I think mine on the Civic was 11. And also it would depend on what RPM that's happening at, because then the torque number would be different. I want to know the data on the Civic. Honestly, I got super into learning about the stuff, but focus was on older cars. Yeah, on a V8 car, those numbers are going to be. I think that I thought that what Freiberg was telling me was 30 or 35 foot-pounds, which sounds like maybe a realistic kind of number. But on the Civic, what we did was took the car out and drove it. I even drove it in two directions on what, according to the GPS, was a fairly flat, level ground, but we went in both directions to see. And what we did was just monitor the vacuum reading at the speed that we were going. And we then duplicated that load on the chassis dyno. And then that way we could monitor what the power output was to obviously reproduce that. Is there any benefit to lowering the compression ratio into the 8-something range on a boosted application these days, or is that just a thing of the past? I think that there is, if for a couple of reasons. One, for boat applications where they're running at wide open throttle for long periods of time, I wouldn't have any problem having it be in the 8s on a blower motor on a boat where I'm running at a wide open throttle for 5 minutes at a time or something. I wouldn't have any issue with doing that either. And also, I think that it might be beneficial for applications where guys are trying to run it on pump gas. You might have and I've never tested this, and I would really want to, but I need knock detection to be able to do it. I'd like to find out if it is better having lower static compression and then being able to run, more boost with that and or timing on pump gas, having that be the limitation versus having more compression. And, for part throttle stuff where you're out of boost, more compression is going to be better. You're going to get better fuel mileage with that. But I don't know about ultimately in terms of performance, which one of those is going to be a better combination. Any videos and articles on the Civic stuff? I don't think I have any videos up on the Civic. I did some testing on air inlet tubes because, again, I was trying to improve mileage. I did some injector testing. We did some, but I just did this more for me. This was even before YouTube, really. Rolling resistance is much more significant at 55 than at 65. It is. As you go up in speed, the aero becomes much more important. How much does an engine lose in horsepower from the dyno to the wheels? There's no set amount because the configuration that you run the engine in is different on the engine dyno normally, at least it is for us, than the way that you run the engine in the car, irrespective of whatever the drivetrain loss is. And different drivetrains will lose different amounts of power. So there's not a, I can't just tell you it's 17.4 horsepower. Mikey Paul, your 6-liter gets 8 miles per gallon with a stage 2 truck cam, but driving like Richard Petty. That's the single biggest thing that you can do to change the fuel mileage of your vehicle. That's the way that you drive. It's more than anything else. Richard, I have an 06 Trailblazer SS. I was thinking about putting an L92 into it. That's a good motor. We like those. Which cam and valve spring would you recommend? Take a look at the videos that I have up on the L92. I think we tried some Summit cams in that, and they worked pretty well. The ones that we put in, I think, were fairly big. But the LY6 stuff would be comparable to that motor. I know that it's it's a little bit bigger, but you're going to have similar results with that. And so take a look at all the cams that we ran on that LY6. We ran stock cams and truck cams and, all kinds of stuff on it. It's running 3,000 RPM at 55 miles an hour. I'm trying to get out of that range because in fifth at 65, 4,500 is way too high. I'm building a big block Chevy 305. What kind of window crank should I use? Running 11 pounds on an LQ4 with an LSA. Low 9 compression on pump gas. Beta 408 on 16 pounds. Would you think a truck Norris cam in my LM7 5.3 liter 78 Monte Carlo hits 12s and be a good? I don't know about the ETs because I don't know anything about your combination, but it works well in as you see from the dyno results, it works well in a 5.3. Have you ever compared fuel flow from the data logging monitored by the brake specific to the actual dyno numbers and see how close they were? But the brake specific could be different, and then the dyno numbers could be the same. So different combinations could use more fuel or less fuel to make the same power output. So there's not a direct correlation between those. And also on the EFI stuff at West Tech, it's hard for us to get brake specific numbers. It's a lot easier because the way that they have their turbine set up for the carbureted applications, it's a lot easier to get brake specific numbers for the carbureted stuff. Cameron, I wish I was in that position. Richard, be honest. The reason you're moving is you saw a 70 LS6 Chevelle in some guy's garage. Said, is it for sale? He said yes, but it's in his garage, so you had to buy the house. Yeah, like I'm a big baller like that. 2 horsepower per 1 pound of fuel. 11 horsepower divided by 2 equals 5.5 pounds in 1 hour, 60 miles. That's less than a gallon. Obviously, there are other variables. Wind, incline, braking. In that, if that's a small block Chevy, I don't think an Extreme Energy 268 is that big. That sounds more like a 270 something cam. I'm going to look it up right now. I don't even see a 268. Is that a flat tapping cam? It's got to be. If it's an XE. Oh, there's an XFI. Let's see. Extreme Energy XE268H. It is a 224 230. Did you get that right? Did you nail that? No, that says 224 236. Maybe you're reading the 236 from the 274 cam. I thought that one of those was off. The 268 is a good cam for a small block Chevy, if that's what your question is. Why would I want an L92 swapped into a Blazer SS that comes with a 6LT? How detrimental is too much lash in the valve train on power? It can hurt power. It can actually improve low speed power. If I don't know what you mean by too much. Too much is going to make it noisy. It's going to be hard on stuff. It can break stuff. But if you have more lash, what you're doing is effectively softening the camshaft, making it milder. I've never had shrimp on a pizza. What is the X in the truck in Chuck Norris? Oh, I'm sure you mean the Chuck Norris cam. I don't know what the last digit is. Or I was sworn to secrecy. So then there would be all kinds of internet conspiracies or something. It's going to be pulling trailers. That can be too big. I would go with a slightly smaller one if it's going to be pulling trailers. I like the we did the Pure Energy one, and then a 252 or 256 or something might be a good one. How about a 6.0 takeout with 139,000 miles? What should I go to freshen it up? You might not need to do anything. Just run it and see if it runs. I'm currently looking for a 6-liter. What's too many miles? I don't know. My 5.3 has 300,000 on it, so you can decide. And the Big Bang motors that we ran, I know that the Gen 3 one had 250,000 on it. Matt, so you bought a Power Adder 400 to put an 871 on it. It comes with an NX. It comes with a nitrous cam in it, a 288, and a hydraulic roller. I'm going to swap to the 299 Big Mother Thumper. This is sight and sound build. So you want it to like have shock and awe, so that's probably be fine. Anyone who shops for cams using anything other than idle quality? That's one opinion. How tight do you set lash on a Honda? I usually do it to the factory specs. So if I remember right, on the B series stuff, it was like 6 and 8. Yeah, Dan, I don't think that they're doing that for the sound quality, right? Let's see. Flush the engine. 5-minute flush, 7-minute idle, drain, put good oil in. What are the best changes to reduce parasitic loss from flywheel to tires on a 4-wheel drive? Well, the first thing you should do is get rid of the 4-wheel drive and put smaller tires on it, narrow tires, lots of pressure, change the gearing. Let's see, 76 on 3 turbo. I don't see where you said what's displacement of the motor. I was looking for 500 or more horsepower. Would you suggest a truck Norris cam? If you have a turbo on it, 500 horsepower is going to be very, very easy. No, even with a stock camshaft in there. I'm a big fan of the Civic VX stuff. There we go. As someone with an 11-second quarter mile, 43 mile per gallon insight. Nice. Makes me happy. So what's in the insight? Let's see here. Yeah, the LSs go, okay, we got to take a look at our, because it's almost time to go here. So should I run dyno testing at 50% and 100% throttle to show part throttle performance? 84% saying yes and 16% saying no. So we'll end our poll there. Again, the 16%, I don't understand why more information wouldn't be better in every case, but hey, that's why we have the polls. My insight is the 995cc. So how did you turbo it or something? It's got to be a big turbo on it or something, right? Scott, I don't know about the cocktail sauce. Shrimp, definitely that would be okay. I wouldn't mind a shrimp and lobster, and I would be all in on that. Not on the cocktail sauce, I don't think, though. The N is a 1 liter 3-cylinder. K24 Insight, that's a good combination. Lobster on anything is good. I've never tried it, but I'm sure that I would. So this will be our last question for tonight, or comment. I don't know if it's a question yet. I bought a 2012 L96 6-liter with 337,000 miles, 337 kilometers on it. Okay. To tear it apart, it was amazingly clean. Bearings look good, and the cylinders, well, still had cross hatching. I couldn't believe it. That they last a really long time. If the bearings are good, just put it back together and run it. I mean, we don't even usually check a lot of that stuff. We just put them on the dyno, and the dyno tells us whether they're good or not. Okay. NSM, I don't know about 100 over. You have to do a sonic check on it and see. Thank you guys all for showing up. Hopefully you guys have all taken a look at the video that I put up on the 485360, choosing the right daily driver camshaft for that. Obviously, it comes down to a number of things, as we've shown, what kind of performance you're looking for, what your personality is, what the day of the week is, whether somebody wants shrimp on their pizza or not. All of that factors in, apparently. I will see you guys all tomorrow.